Hello, everyone, and welcome to our 73rd webinar of our series here in 2020. We've got this one, and we've got one more on Thursday that we will be kind of tidying up the Race Studio 3 analysis. It's update number 6 for that. We'll be doing that on Thursday, and that'll be our last one of the year. So everybody keep that in mind if you come here live. We'll take the rest of 2020 off, and when we come back in 2021, we'll be starting with an only scheduling. You'll get an email here either today or tomorrow that is extending it out probably the first 6 months of 2021 for just Tuesdays. So we're going to start one a week that is actually scheduled, and then we will probably do some Thursdays as well, but they're not going to be scheduled. We've got some special topics we want to do, maybe new hardware, some other things that maybe we do want to share with you folks, but they won't be scheduled all the time. Perfect. Let's go ahead and get started. The topic today is going to be measuring driver fitness, and there is some hardware that you can get. Matt's going to talk a lot about that. It's come down in price in such a way that there is such added value to it, and there is a lot of science that comes with the understanding of what your stress levels and how much physical effort you're putting into your driving, and then how that affects your decision making and your speeds and all these other things that are going to come along with it. Matt's just going to touch on it. Again, Matt's not a doctor as far as I know, and so he's not, we're not giving medical advice, but what we're going to talk about is introducing it. And again, in a few weeks, second Tuesday in January, I think it's the 15th. Is that the right date? You will. The 12th. Okay, the 12th is going to be a full 1 hour webinar with Dr. David Ferguson, and he's going to come in and actually talk about some more detail on what we're talking about here. So perfect. The other thing that I want to make sure that everybody understands, this is a presentation that has a lot of slides in it, and we might get to some live data later, but it's a lot of it is going to be presentation centric. So this presentation has been created into a PDF and then zipped up, and Robbie will put the link up into the chat box for you guys to grab if you want to. The data that we're going to use is going to be available to you. He'll link that. And and the user profiles that we use will be linked for Race Studio 3. We're going to do everything in Race Studio 3 analysis today. The other thing is, if you're watching this later in YouTube, all of those links will be down in the description box below. So you can grab this data, you can grab the presentation, and take a look at it and get a little bit more information that way. Okay, let's do a little self-introduction of Matt. I'll jump up to that. Matt, tell us a little bit about you. This is your 8th time you're co-hosting, so a lot of people know you pretty well. I know you attend most of them in the audience, the ones that you do not present on. But give us a little bit of a background on you.
Yeah, so I'm a longtime AIM dealer. I really enjoy the community of the AIM users all over, even before we had this webinar series going. And racing, I started out about 22 years ago with the Porsche, got into Formula Continentals as a crew, and then into data kind of most recently. And then through sort of my own fitness journey is I started to look into some of this kind of bringing the medical side of things into racing. And it started kind of a 2-year or 3-year now study into all of it. And I'm not a doctor. I'm not an expert on the medical portion of this. And luckily, we're going to have Dr. Ferguson come in and do the next session. I'll save some of the info about him for then. But we're going to have a great expert who does know all this. So today's kind of a setup for that, to say, if you have this equipment, if you have these things, here's a really basic understanding, and then he can give us a little bit more. So that's where I kind of, as the slide says, I get into some of the different configurations and a little bit more of the advanced use of all this hardware that AIM makes versus just using, the GPS or a throttle position.
So you're not a doctor, you don't play one on TV, and you didn't stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night, right? So
I did not, but
we've
I've got a lot of heart rate monitors sitting next to me.
you feel like you're getting closer, right? So
Yeah.
perfect. So let's go to the next slide. And as while you're kind of starting up, Matt, a little bit, I'm going to give you control of the mouse, and you can click the screens and point at different things. So let's go ahead and let's get started. And the first one is an interesting one where we are race car drivers athletes? It's kind of a question that's been out there a long time. I think that's pretty well settled, but give us what your idea of that is, Matt.
Yeah, so this is a kind of one of the central questions of so much that goes on with driving, is that people ask all the time, are racers athletes? And the resounding answer is yes, to the point that guys, even on the pit crews anymore, are athletes. When you look at teams like a NASCAR team that does these pit stops, they practice for it. It takes great strength and speed and agility. And then when you start to look at it even more, you go, NASCAR teams are picking ex-pro athletes or high-level collegiate athletes. Like when you look at what a jackman does on a NASCAR team, it's amazing. The guy picks up a 60 or 40, 50-pound jack, jumps over a Jersey barrier, and in one pump jacks the car up. It's amazing. So not just are the drivers athletes, but the pit crew. And in the drivers at all different levels, when you start to look at the G loads that a driver's under, even in a Formula V or a Miata in these longer races, it's a lot. And then you start to look at the stamina and the strength that it takes someone to do, say, a Lemons race and drive a 3-hour stint. That's a significant load on a person. So we look at all those things, we go, there's no doubt a driver is an athlete. And then we say we can take the things that they do in all the other forms of being an athlete or all the other sports and take that and then say, how do we apply some of that to driving? And how can we use some of those measurements and other things to engineer the driver, not just the car all the time? Yeah. And what would amaze people, even in my slow 914 with me driving, I still get to claim to be an athlete.
There you go.
So I wanted to jump ahead here.
We've got a couple. While you're jumping ahead, there are a couple of questions there, but both of those we're going to actually touch upon here in the slides. So
yeah, I saw those, and I was going to kind of wait and tie those in because they're really good questions.
I didn't want them to think that we were ignoring them. Both of those are coming, so be
yeah,
ready.
And Neil's question is really good, and there's a little bit of a story to it. I'm guessing Neil knows that part too. When we look at the hardware that they use in a lot of these levels, is it's really neat stuff. So here on the top left, this little pill, it's a pill you swallow. It goes through your digestive tract, and as it does it, it transmits your core temperature. I don't know if anyone has heard, in IMSA, they've outlawed this pill, and it was one that Wayne Taylor Racing did a lot of the studies with it, and the guys would swallow the pill and they could track the driver's core temperature, and we'll talk about why that's important, and see what happened. But because it's inside of you, if something happened and they had to give you an MRI because of an incident, they can't do that because you have this little piece of metal in you. So it's been banned in a fair amount of racing. I saw Jordan Taylor was talking about GM Cadillac Racing, or Corvette Racing, just used it in their test a week ago. The next one,
I don't think that's a small pill, by the way. I'm not good at taking pills, and that's a
it's actually not too big. And one of the pictures I didn't use gave the size, but it's not a giant pill, but some people would call it a horse pill, but it's not your little tiny aspirin either. And that might be the person with the biggest hands ever, right? The next one that's here is something very similar to what IndyCar drivers wear now. And in their earbuds, they're able to take acceleration. So they actually have accelerometers built in, and they can use that for how hard the guys hit their head and what forces they experienced in an accident. And the latest ones, they're building into it temperature and heart rate. So you get all this out of something that the driver's already wearing at that level, which is a pretty neat thing. That's at a really high level. I've talked to some of the guys that make the earbuds, and I think there's one company that makes it, and it's just for IndyCar. And one of the links, hopefully the guys can put up in the chat, is about these earbuds and how it works.
Is there communications through that as well? Their radio coming
Yeah,
through
yeah.
that
So
too?
it's
Okay,
your
that's
regular
I assume so.
radio buds,
Okay.
and it does this extra data monitoring.
And they've added the rest of the stuff. So.
And what's pretty neat, not to go too far down the rabbit hole of the overall medical stuff, is that using those, the forces that give you a concussion aren't necessarily just the hit, it's the twist in your head, or the accelerations and the movement and the rotation. And they can measure it with these to see if a driver is in place of a situation where they expect a concussion, if the hit was that big or not. And with some of the newest telemetry, they're actually taking that information, transmitting it to the rescue team. So when they show up, they know how big of an incident a driver had, not just that he hit the wall. Did he bump it or did he really ram it?
Pretty cool. And then the rebound and the rest of it, right? And the rotation.
Super amazing that they can do all these things. The next one is the gloves that another Italian company like AIM, OMP, they develop gloves that you wear that have the pads in them that take your heart rate while you're driving. That's used through F1. It's a pair of gloves I'd love to get. I haven't seen that they're really available to purchase or anything. But super neat that, another thing that you're just wearing that does so much for you. The bottom outside pictures here, this is Tony Kanaan. If you don't know too much about Tony, he is a super fitness zealot, super into riding his bike and doing those sorts of races, all the inside training, and he's a pretty strong, rugged guy. And this is the latest version of the shirt that you see he's wearing, and another one developed through Magneti Marelli and NTT and going with OMP, I believe. And those shirts have a series of sensors woven into the fabric that they're wearing, and it gives them heart rate, and then it gives them muscle activation. So one of the quick stories about that with Tony Kanaan is they were thinking that he didn't have enough strength because he would get out of the car and his forearms and his arms would be really sore. What they actually found was he had that death grip on the wheel, and it showed up in the data that his muscles were tensed for so long that it started to create other problems. So it wasn't a strength issue, it was really kind of a technique issue. Pretty interesting stuff. But again, none of this is really available to us except for this middle piece. And this is we're going to talk about it a little bit more in a minute. That's the receiver that can receive signals from all of these types of devices wirelessly so that we can put it into our data. An aside about that as well is that's used in a lot of spots from Sail GP and America's Cup kind of sailing all the way through gaming. That's behind some of the stuff we see on TV when there's a heart rate involved. But all that data that we see from the pill and some of those things, the way it's used in research and what a lot of people use is they get this sort of graph, and it's hard to see, and it's hard to see in the real stuff, is across the bottom, it just has a timestamp. So what they have to try to do in their research is take a timestamp from the race car at, say, noon and match it up with a timestamp from the data and say, this is what was happening then. And these lines in here are the start of the race and maybe a caution and the finish. But it doesn't line up. It's really hard to read, and it takes more work. So now, with some of these devices, we can put this into our AIM system. So we have the 22-pin expansion harness, so we get CAN 2 out of our new loggers. And then we have these. These are the two devices we see right there. Something that is really, really cool about these, they don't weigh anything. So this one just has a DTM connector because that's the standard I use in my cars. And that connector weighs about as much as this. It weighs less than an ounce. This device is a more advanced version. And again, it weighs not an ounce. This one can receive up to like an EKG as you're driving. The data side of that gets really hard because it's so much data, but it can do breathing rate, core temperatures, all these super measures from multiple devices. Really neat technology. And both of these devices are made by a current company in the UK called Yellow Cog. You can see their name on here. A guy, Mark Smith, developed them, makes them, does the software for them. Really neat stuff that helps us get through it. And it's come down in cost from where it was very expensive originally to much more reasonable prices. A great question from Sherm that pops up here is, can we do this with an Evo 4S? Absolutely, most of the time. It really depends on your configuration. And with all these CAN devices, as we talked about in the TPMS and everything else, it depends on how you're using your system. If you have a ECU that's going with it, that you're using one of the standard protocols, we can't add something to it. If you're building your own CAN protocol, you can certainly add these to it. And one of the really neat things about these devices, they are fully CAN configurable. So we can change the bus speed, we can change the addresses, we can change everything in them to make them work with your system. And if that doesn't really make sense to you, Robbie did a great video on CAN, and it's also one that we can help in configuring those so when you get them. So Sherm answered that he's got a club Ford. So if he's not using that CAN connection, we can totally put that into CAN 1 on a device. And that could be a Solo. I hooked this one up to a Solo 2DL. I wore my wearable and I rode my bike around and I started tracking my heart rate. And I have this, I should have included it. I have a really cool graphic of my neighborhood's hills and everything and my heart rate and how hard I was breathing and everything. And that brings us to the next part about this is the connection. It's just like when we talked about the TPMS. It's a 2-wire CAN connection to the dash, and then you have to give it power. The part that goes towards Neil's question is, what do we get information from? And that's called the wearable in the industry. And the wearables go everywhere from, this is a very simple, this one's made by Wahoo. That's an arm strap that you put on and it does it, to the kind of chest strap that everybody's used to at the gym, goes around your chest, up to this is called a bioharness by a company called Zephyr. It's used through very high-end athletic training, in military studies, in medical studies. And this thing does, and it's this little tiny module, and it does up to, this is the actual module here. You know, it's a 3/8 of an inch thick and I don't know, 1.5 inches around. Doesn't weigh anything. And that can do a full EKG. It has accelerometers in it. It has so much information here. And it's pretty amazing what this does. So through this strap and these sensor pads, it gets your heart rate, and through in here, there is a pressure sensor, and it measures when your chest expands and contracts, so you get a breathing rate out of it. These devices all transmit one of 3 ways. ANT plus, towards Neil's question. And ANT plus is really neat because it is a very rigid standard. So all heart rate monitors that work on ANT plus transmit the same signal. So it's very, very easy to integrate. The next one is Bluetooth. The Bluetooth transmits, and sometimes it takes a specific protocol for it. And then Bluetooth Low Energy, I always thought it was like a more efficient version of Bluetooth, but it's actually a totally different standard and communication measure. So even though it shares a name, it is similar to Bluetooth and it does use less energy, but it's not the same. So in these devices, this one will do Bluetooth Low Energy in ANT plus. This one will do Bluetooth in ANT plus. In practice, for most people, almost all the standard wearables that people get are ANT plus, and it works very easy. And with that is for endurance teams, we can set these. So not only does it give you all this information, but it could have a driver number or name associated with it. So we can see who was driving for that data. Pretty neat stuff. And then the other sensor that I showed in here is called a Moxie. And what the Moxie does is you usually wear it on your thigh, and it will give you a reading of how much of your blood oxygen. And for what Dr. Ferguson is a kinesthesiologist, which is a study of movement and everything. And using that, they can see how hard you're working. This is a sensor they use through the NFL and some of those other sports where the guys, hockey, where the guys are really using their quads and muscles to do everything. So it's another measure that people get into, but you have to have the background knowledge to use it. Versus heart rate, you're going to see we can do a lot of analysis with just the heart rate that you and I can understand very easily and bring to what we're doing. So we kind of talked about the wearable, what we're going to wear, the idea of how we get it into the data system. And they go, well, what good is this? What does it actually tell us? So in these and from these devices, we get heart rate variability, energy burn, which is how many calories an hour you're burning, your heart rate zone, which if you've ever done any working out, you'll see that they give you 5 zones to say, are you working super muscles? Is it cardio? Is it resting? All those sorts of things. And then from there, we can go even further with some of the devices and get a calculated core temperature. So how hot you are inside your body. And estimation of our overall exertion, how hard we are actually working, kind of on a scale of 0 to 100. And then there's some other fringe measures we can start to take out that become more and more specific. But for most people, the ones we really want to look at is heart rate variability, and then kind of the overall exertion idea. One thing I'll say is we look at our data, and I've shared data with Dr. Ferguson, and he's studied drivers at all different levels all around the world. My biotelemetry data in general is boring. I'm a part of a small population that my heart rate doesn't go as high. So when we look at it, my data says I go to 130 when I'm really excited or something hard's going on. A lot of people, that's 180 or 190. And some of the people that have worked with this, there's a great story about drivers at Bathurst on Mount Panorama. Young guys, 20, 25, driving Porsche Cup cars. They studied their data as they were driving, and their heart rates were hitting 190 and 200 beats a minute, which is maxed out red line for anyone. When they saw that, they said, that is super hard work. And then they went to the gym and they said, how hard do we have to make this person work out to try to match that heart rate? They couldn't do it. Like, they made them run as fast as they could. They put the treadmill max angle, beat the heck out of these kids physically. They wouldn't hit that heart rate again. They put them back in the car and they'd hit it. I've had some guys run pretty high level motorcycle racing, and they'll hit 175, 180 beats as an adult, which is maxed out red line on heart rate. So it's pretty neat how much the stress and work of driving a race car can make people go. So as we look at all these things, we see here, this is my exertion. And for me, it's never very high because my heart rate stays low. We have heart rate variability. And we're going to talk about that in a minute, the heart rate zone, and we get a measure of my heart rate. So to explain these things a little bit more, your heart rate is how many beats a minute your heart rate goes. It's like a personal RPM. Your heart rate variance is, we've all seen a TV show, and when they hook somebody up in the hospital, hopefully you haven't had to have the experience, you get the machine that has the little wave on it, and it beep, beep, beep. If you measure from beep to beep, from the spike to the spike, and then you take that time measurement and you kind of normalize it for how fast your heart's beating, it gives you this measure of heart rate variance. That measurement tells us a lot about how stressed somebody is, because your body the more stress you get becomes like a metronome, and you lock into a cycle, and you will beat at a very regular pace. As you're less stressed, your body focuses sort of less on how much effort it takes to make everything run, and that beat becomes a little less regular. And hopefully when Dr. Ferguson comes on, he doesn't say I have it totally mixed up, but that's your general idea of this. And a way that a lot of people see it, it's going to be upside down, is, I wear a Garmin watch wearable here that gives me my heart rate, and it has a measure of stress. That stress level is in, that's measuring HRV. And if you have a smart bed, like the new Sleep Number beds or some of the mats, I know a company called Withings made a mat that you could put underneath or on top of your mattress under your sheets, and it measures your heart rate as you're sleeping, and it measures that heart rate variance. I have no idea how they get that from a bed, but they figured it out. Your energy burn is simply how many calories an hour your body's using up. And that's kind of a measurement you get at all different gyms as part of workouts. The same thing with your heart rate zone is they take, if your maximum's 180 and your resting is 40, they divide it into 5 zones and say, are you resting or working at a certain level? Exertion is sort of a measure of your total output. And what percentage, are you working hard or easy? That's really kind of what that measures. And again, it's a calculation. It might not be perfect, but because it's always calculated the same, it gives you the same error all the time. Then we have core temp. The data I'm showing you in this presentation and that we're going to look at a lap of is, it was on a cool day. I have a very breathable suit, so my core temp never went up. But as your core temp goes higher, your mental abilities start to go down. And these are some of the things I put on this next slide. So, why is your heart rate important? The higher it goes up, the harder you're working, the more you fatigue, the harder it is to do things, right? If you climb 10 flights of steps and you're totally worn out, it's hard to think and do stuff because you're catching your breath and you're focused on that. Heart rate variance, it tells us how stressed the person is. And it's a really neat measure because in that heart rate variance, as it's changing, it measures stress that you might not be able to feel or see or tell someone that you're stressed. It's a great insight into the driver that they can't give you. It's also something that idea of having an insight into the driver that they can't tell you or that they have no control over because you can't control your heart rate. Some drivers really hate it and they won't do it. But if you can get them to, it gives you a chance to engineer the driver and to learn a lot more. The energy burn, the exertion, the heart rate zone, again, general measures that different people like to use to say how hard is somebody working. The core temp, as we talked about, as your body gets hotter, just like when you have a fever, it's harder to think and it's harder to do things. And the other one that we get from the bioharness is the breathing waveform. Because it works off your chest, contraction and expansion, we can't see, it's not super duper exact, but it's a really good measure to tell us what's going on. And I think we're going to see a neat example of what that means. And here I wanted to pop in a couple of tips because I did this whole presentation in Race Studio 3 is when I started to look for this data, I said, okay, I want to find a data that has something good in it and has some qualities. And I opened a couple files and I forgot that I think it's almost one of the best editions of Race Studio 3 is that we have this preview. So just as a quick aside in here, we have our dates, and Roger, help me out if I explain any of this wrong or I use the wrong terminology, is we have our overall sessions that go by dates and tracks. In the middle, we have the breakdown for that day, so we're getting more specific. And then all the way to the right, we have these extra buttons up here that give us more information and give us a way to preview information before we have to open the file, go to our profile, pull up our measures, and try to see it all. We can adjust that with the icon here. And I just put heart rate on it. And then I get an outline. And I know Emiliano had talked about this in one of his sessions of the highest points and the lowest points. And then the lap we're hovering over shows up in the middle. So it's a really neat way to quickly take a preview of everything. And that's how I found the data that I wanted to grab today to use out of all my files. Neat little tip. Jorgen has a really great question is, can we take data from a Garmin or an Apple Watch, which has the pulse oximeter? Maybe. It depends on how it transmits that Bluetooth and if it can be added to one of the protocols to use. But these devices, where they're designed for working out, are much more accurate than these devices. I've done kind of my own personal like checking and estimation, and I've gone to the gym and worn, 3 or 4 of these all at once to compare them as I'm working out and I'm trying to use them. And the wrist worn kind of wearables that you every day, your Fitbits, your Garmin wristwatches, your Apple Watches, are not very accurate when you have big changes in your heart rate. They give you the gist through the day, but if you want to know working out, they're not nearly as accurate. And this is one that the military uses at the highest levels of their research. And I always kind of consider this one my gold standard to measure against. And, these wearables just don't compare. There's actually a movement in the groups that study these things. And I think I gave the guys a link that maybe they can share for the International Council of Motorsport Sciences, which is a collection of people, doctors, track people, teams that study a lot of these kind of things. And in doing all that, some of them are even working to provide better information and better systems that are more robust to log it. So we sometimes can get it from your Garmin watch or something, but it's not usually very accurate data. And it's much easier to wear the chest straps. Hopping in, when we kind of look at a full lap of this is kind of a profile or an idea of what I wanted to look at. So I pulled up a lap that had my heart rate and stuff in it, and just looking at it pretty quick, I said, okay, across the top we have speed, and that's something I have in all my analysis is speed. Then I looked at my heart rate because that's a pretty good measure, and it's one that it's easy to think about. We know when our heart's pumping really hard. So we have some pretty high spots. We have our low point, and I looked at it really quickly, and I said, it's interesting. It went from the low to the high pretty direct. I said, that's kind of interesting that it did that. And I looked at some of these other points, and I said, geez, the cycle of this, there's some correlation to the speeds and the corners of my speed trace, right? So that's kind of interesting. That gives us something to look at. And here we're using RR value, which is the measurement that goes into that HRV that we talked about, the heart rate variance. And I said, geez, those sort of match up with it.
Yeah.
And we see these big waves in our breathing that also kind of match up with it. So I said, okay, we can see there's some information here, and it's leading us to these points to look at these. So then I jumped in, I said, what if we focus on the heart rate and look where it goes from the lowest to the highest? And I said, we'll just narrow our window down, right? So we have an overall lap, and now we're kind of looking at a what. And we said our heart rate starts to go up, and we're honing in on the where. As I jump into this a little bit better and a little bit deeper, I found another tip that I thought was pretty cool as we see this information. And the tip here is that we can double click on the new segments in Race Studio 3, and it zooms us into that area. So we're no longer having to do our scroll wheel everywhere, or it's one that I really like is the 3D zoom, but now we have it with just double clicking.
And I added a slide there. I didn't know if you've seen it or not.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we can also double click it to zoom back out. So I think this is a pretty cool feature that as we break our splits up, we're able to get right into things and hone in on that information we wanted to look at.
That is a new feature that they've added that I think is going to be one of those that everybody is like, no, oh, that's kind of cool, whatever. But I have found in just my short amount of time that double clicking on the segments and zooming in that way instead of other processes has become by far my favorite way of moving around and looking closer at data. So I think this is going to be pretty cool.
Yeah, it's one of the ones that I'll be really honest. When I first looked at Race Studio 3, I looked at it and I'm like, well, I don't know. And then I said, well, why am I not really liking this? And what I came up with for me, I was like, it's different. I have to learn something new. And then I took some nights and I started playing with everything and I got into it. And then now I realize how powerful it is. And I'm pretty much to the point that with a couple more features, I'm going to be almost always in Race Studio 3. I've started building my more profiles. I've started getting into it where I think these features make it so powerful and so easy to use that it's changing what I do already. And we're in the off season here. Andy, I'm going to get to your question in a couple minutes because there's some really interesting information about that. And it's one that I think Dr. Ferguson's going to get into a little bit more because he's got more knowledge and experience than I do there. But
and by the way, while Matt is ready to move to the next slide, we keep referring to questions and answers. And if you're watching this on YouTube later, down in the description box, Brick is who compiles all of these questions and answers that are asked live, and we put them into a document that within about 24 hours, I get it linked into the description box below. So every time we say that's a good looking question and we didn't read it for you and you're watching this later, open up the document that's down there, the Q&A document, and you'll see all the questions.
And so people at home or watching this later without having to go through, Kyle made a great comment that because the car's yellow, it makes me more excited. And if it was baby blue, I'd be a lot calmer. You wouldn't believe what happens in a red car. The drivers go nuts.
Yeah.
So when we jump back to this and we look at this, we go, as I came up to this corner, there's a real heart rate spike and my breathing rate changes and everything else. And when I looked at this, I started to go, well, what's the why? What's going on here that's making me do this? Because it's not something, if I got out of the car and you said, what's your heart rate like in turn one? I'd say, I don't know. And if you said, what is your, are you feeling stressed in turn one? I'd say, yeah, a little bit. It's a pretty quick corner. It's not really easy, but it's not particularly bad. It's not anything really hard. But when we look at the data, my body is telling us something really, really different. It's not something that we necessarily consciously have a way to read, but our body tells a story about it. So I started to go with our analysis triangle. I said, well, what's the where and the, help me out, Roger. It's the what, the where,
what
the why.
Happened, where it happened, why did it happen?
Yeah. So now I go, let's add the why to this. Let's see what's going on. And when I did that and I added a front shock position, I went, here is something. And when we look into this, as my heart rate rises and there's a lag in your heart rate, something exciting doesn't happen and your heart rate shoots up. It takes some time to elevate. There is a response lag in it. But I said, geez, this is something. And then I started to remember the track. And as I started to get in there and I zoomed, to go back?
I can go back for you. Let me try it.
Yep.
There we go.
There we go. When I started to look at that, I said, I did it again. There's a big bump in turn one. And when you get the car in and you get down towards this apex, this big bump throws the car a little bit. And if you get it wrong, it really throws the car. And if you get it right, it's not really a bad thing. So I said, you know what? That's the answer, right? This bump is what caused my heart rate to go up, for me to breathe different, as we're going to look at in a minute. And now it's something that maybe I consciously didn't have a big thought of, but I really did have an impact on it. And this is one to Andy's question is, has anyone proved that drivers in good shape drive better later in the race? There's a good amount of research that say, in general, drivers in better shape have to exert themselves less and they drive better, not just late in the race, but the whole race. There's also a big body of information that they've studied, and they said when a driver or an athlete in general is physically straining themselves a lot, when they're exerting more effort to do something, it's harder for them to get in the zone and in that state of flow to perform better. And that's across all sports. And that's why you see guys, you could argue Michael Jordan was the best basketball player in the world ever. A guy like him, their workouts and their training was off the charts hard, because when they got to the game, it wasn't hard anymore. It was easier. Same idea with, we talk about in driving that guys should go drive karts and shifter karts and all those kind of things, because it makes it harder and harder. It's harder to drive. You have to react quicker. So when you go to a car and everything happens a little bit slower, it seems easier.
There's also the mental piece of that, right? You
Yeah.
talked about Tony Kanaan, that he was actually getting tired and having some problems, and it was because of he was death gripping the steering wheel,
Yep.
and so there's that, and then there's this distinction sometimes, I think, that is real. I'm no expert in this field at all, obviously, but the you're in shape, and then you're in driving shape. It uses a different set of muscles and a different set of things, and the mental is thrown into it, that guys that race a lot all the time every weekend, they can be out of shape, it may be a little bit more physically, but they end up with, okay, I lean into, use the seat a little bit more, whatever, right? And there is this whole driving shape versus actual physical shape. It's an interesting thought.
Humongous. And just last night I read an article I would have never ever thought about, that Lando Norris said when they came back and he got in the car, was it Australia or the other race, that he ended up having to take pain medicine because he hurt from being in his seat.
Just being in the seat.
From being out. And then I said, geez, like, is it that much strain and that much force in the drivers? And what he said it came down to was he put on some muscle. And his body changed shape just enough.
Seat didn't fit. Yeah.
And his seat didn't fit perfect anymore.
Yeah,
and I think about it like, my race car, I fit in my seat pretty snug, and you see how we build foam and seats for people, and you go, wow, how little bit of that change is it to make those differences?
The reason I even have that in my mind is I raced off-road desert racing for years, for about 20 years, short course and desert, but did a lot of desert racing. And there was a period, I think it was 1994, that I raced every weekend for, I think, 8 weekends. And these aren't just, a 30-minute race. These were all, 7-8 hours on Saturday or Sunday. And at the beginning of all of that, I would be sore, like, I had a real hard workout, which you had, right? And, 6 or 7 hours of driving in the desert, I'd feel that pain. And as the body was recovering through Wednesday, get back in the car, and it was less the week after, and it was less the week after, and it was less the week after. And by like week 4 of doing that, I was getting out of the car, I'd be tired, but the next day I was, bumped right back. There is this racing shape thing that you're using the same muscles and everything. It's kind of interesting.
Right. It's a workout. Like if you take up running or something, or weightlifting, right? The first time you go in, those muscles you used are so sore. Yeah. And as you do it, they start to kind of acclimate to that. And that's the basis. There's a number of really great gyms. The one that Tony Kanaan works out at, and a lot of the other drivers, is a place called Pit Fit in Indy. They've got some different online programs. They're one of the real leaders in it. And they've developed machines and exercises all based around driving cars. So it works your shoulders as you steer. Some really neat and impressive head rigs to do neck strength.
I'll bet.
IndyCar drivers, right, on an oval, right? How hard is that thing twisting your head the whole time?
Amazing.
A guy in Charlotte, Trey Shannon, does a lot of it with upcoming drivers, and a lot of the guys based out of Charlotte.
Trey is a good friend of AIM. It worked with us for a number of years, so we all know him fairly well.
Yeah, and he's one. He started out in go-karts, right, with the Micron line of stuff, and doing it, and how much strain that put on him. And I think he's one of the few guys did a 24-hour race all by himself.
Held the world record for number of miles driven in a go-kart in a 24-hour period. That's pretty fit. Go-karts will
Talk
kick your
about
butt anyway,
fit.
right? Then
Pretty
do it for 24
amazing.
hours. Yeah.
So that's sort of a big one lap easy picture that any of us can take out of this and draw things back. The next part I wanted to look at is when we bring in breathing. It's a more expensive setup, but it tells us something really cool. So I started to look at this one, and it can tell us, are you holding your breath? Are you breathing rapidly? Again, sometimes my data is a little bit boring compared to a lot of people because it doesn't have the same sort of spikes and that kind of thing. And in here, though, I looked at it, and
your breathing does.
The breathing changes, right? And it's the up and down isn't necessarily a big breath or a small breath. It's really an in or an out because it's a pressure sensor measuring your chest pushing out on it. So when you look at this, you go, well, here's sort of like a breath holding event. Here's one, here's sort of one, right? And we see some of this, and I look at it and I said, this really comes down to me holding my breath in brake zones, right? We see here's one in a brake zone.
In the breath. Yeah, you take in the breath and then you hold it.
And I do my braking. And when we instruct and we're riding right seat with someone, these are the things we can hear through the microphone sometimes, or we can look over and see it. But, I have a race car with one seat. You don't have someone to be able to do that. And even if you're on the radio, it's not something that's coming across. But again, the data doesn't lie. Here it is. I'm doing it. There's no question. The other one that we're going to see that I didn't highlight, and Roger picked it out when I sent him this all over. He goes, hey, you missed one. And then he goes, oh, I looked at it, though, but it's not a brake zone. This one's a big, long, sweeping corner. You come down a hill, it's real fast, and you come back up. And it's one of the spots where you turn in and the car catches. And then you're not really sure you're going to make it till you get all the way out to that track out curb.
Interesting.
And then you're like, oh, made it. Let's do it again. But we can see I was kind of holding my breath in here.
I took it in a breath before you hit that corner.
Yeah. And Roger, you said you used to do the same thing off-road racing with jumps.
Yeah, exactly. You know something is coming, right? So it's a sign of tensing up at some level, right? You take that breath, and that's when you're tensing up. And I used to do it all the time. We didn't have data, obviously, but I knew I was doing it. I could feel it. I had a lot more time in the car to do it. But interesting that those are so lined up with events that are happening on the track. That's kind of interesting.
Right. And going through all these is then these are some of the things I looked at really quick. And I threw this screen up here. This is where, and I know I've ended a lot of my sessions this way, but I'm sort of the kind of guy that I say I can lead a horse to water, but I can't make him drink. When you get data like this, and if you download my data from this or any of the other sessions, you can look at it and start playing with it. So this is a screen that I made up in Race Studio 3 using some of the new features. So I did some XY plots and I colorized them for different things. And I said, hey, start making graphs, start throwing some more laps in there and see what kind of correlation we can make out of it. And study it to see what are you doing and why are you doing that and how does it all go. The first one that's one that everybody kind of sees here that I put in was just a friction circle. And then I colorized it for heart rate. And I said, well, geez, is there any correlation from corners or braking or anything like that? In the previous slides where we see my heart rate went up after, we say, well, with heart rate, maybe there's this lag, so it doesn't show something. But it's worth studying, right? I tell people, stop watching TV at night, start playing with your data. Grab your computer, start playing with it and see what you can find in here. So turn on a whole bunch of laps and see what you get. And if you go, well, maybe it's not that measure, colorize it for something else. Because this is what I sat and I did the other night and how I've taught myself how to use all these new features in Race Studio 3. I put up just a histogram and I said, well, where is my heart rate the most? And it's kind of interesting because me wearing this all the time, I kind of track it. For me, when I start walking around and I do stuff, I'm kind of at 100. So I say, well, 90 to 100 is minimal exertion, and then this is a little bit more. So I said, it's really kind of a lot or none, right? I don't have that big middle. Maybe that changes by the track. I didn't make this one in Race Studio 3 for lots of different tracks, but maybe it changes per track or per lap, or maybe it's different morning or night when I'm tired or not, right? All the things you can kind of jump into. This one I did heart rate versus speed. And I said, well, is there something here? And we see a little bit, and it's something to study. And here I did heart rate versus lateral G, or is it maybe long G? But do both of them, right? And start putting all these different things in there and charting it, and use the color map features to look at heart rate and put all these things in there to keep digging and keep looking at all the different ways you can kind of slice and dice this data to go through it, because we're not limited to a simple spreadsheet anymore. We don't just have a graph that says at noon your heart rate went up. We can put that to a spot, and we can start to see what the trend is and see what's going on. And kind of, you know, Kyle's thing is, you can tell people they're coaching, they're under driving. That's a little bit harder because everybody's comfort zones are really different. So I have a good family friend and a really great driver who was an extreme sports guy. Did parasailing, rock climbing, ice climbing, been at the highest mountains all over the world. He doesn't get spooked.
He doesn't get spooked. Yeah, exactly.
He doesn't get spooked. And a quick aside, because I really want to be able to get into the video here, but Red Bull, we know them because of their F1 sponsorship and their drink. As athletes go, they're one of the coolest companies out there, and they get involved in all these things for human performance. And I didn't give the guys a link, but you can find it. They have a story about Felix Baumgartner and the first jump from space. It's been broken, I think, twice now. Somebody went higher. But their idea of stress in a person is that you can work it like a muscle. So you think if you do some lifting activity, bicep curls, and you can curl, you know, a 12-ounce beer, right? And then you can get a 36-ounce beer, and you keep building it. When you go to that little 8-ounce glass, it's really easy, right? And that compares with all your different ways of doing exercise, right? You try to build the weight, and then the low weight seems really easy. They do the same thing with stress. So they say, if we can get someone stressed to here, and your race car driving's here, it's not stressful anymore. You can deal with a higher level. So and maybe I'm wrong, but I would never use a driver's comfort level or some of these other things to say they're not working hard, because I don't think there's a great correlation. But we might find out from Dr. Ferguson my experience is wrong, or that other people use it different ways.
Well, that's part of that racing shape too, right? You're not
absolutely
stressing out, or you're not overreacting internally. Your adrenaline level's not shooting up through the roof, so a lot of these things aren't being spiking, right? Because of that.
Yep.
Some of that too.
Andy's comment about lap distance to heart rate to see where you're scared, you know, that's kind of what we looked at in a great way. And Robinson has a cool question, and something I have a little bit of a funny story about is did you ever compare a cool suit versus a not suit? I don't have a cool suit set up in my car, but I've compared different clothing and different ways to do it. So like I've worked out in a sauna, worked out in regular clothes, done stuff with my driving suit to compare the core temp and how it goes. There's a bunch of driver science around those cool suits at the really high levels of them. Some of the companies have done more research and used in different ways versus others. The cooler you are with a regular temperature, the better you perform. And maybe that's something we get into some of those things in another webinar. But I see here, Roger pulled up this lap for us. So I thought it'd be kind of neat to see how we can pull all this together and see it in action with the software and how it plays out. And Joe's comment about he'd love to see Grosjean's data from his recent crash. They have it. We'll never get to see it, but it exists. It's out there that somebody has it.
You know, it was such a big wreck. I'll bet you some of that in part of their analysis. I think we're probably going to see some of that. It might take 3 or 4 months, but I bet you we're going to see some of that.
Right. And Roger, sometimes it's easier if you control, if you want to play through here. And what's important, I think, as we look at it, is we can see through the lap what my heart rate does, what my breathing is. And then I threw the shock position sensor in here because you can get a scale of what's going on and see what's going on. And you guys are going to laugh at me because I think you probably know me a little bit. When you look at my picture, the heart rate readout on the SmartyCam didn't work. I am the perennial cobbler needs new shoes. I'm like playing with configurations and trying everything different all the time. But you can see I have all the CAN setups we've talked about in my car, along with an extra GS dash, and my GS dash actually displays my heart rate as I'm driving. It's one of the ones, as you have it, I'm like, it'd be interesting to see this and see if I can correlate as I'm driving.
I will start it to play here, but I will tell one more story on Matt. You notice that this is 2019, late 2019 data and video. We would have liked to have some from this year, but cobbler, in shoes, like you just mentioned, he's loaned out his SmartyCam several times at the race at the weekend, so we didn't have any 2020 data and video that was linked, because every time Matt would go to the track, he'd have a user that wanted a camera, he would take his own out and give it to them. So this is it's good data. Don't get me wrong. It's just kind of funny that we had to go all the way back to 19 to get some video from him. So I'm just going to start to play. You guys might want to turn down your audio or bring it up, whatever works for you. Matt can kind of talk us through here, going up to that corner.
As we come in here, this is this big bump.
There's that bump right there.
That bump, and that's kind of what sets me off. This is a tricky part of track where you're trying to get car position, and I found this is where a lot of lap time is gained.
You see where it's breathing waves going up and down.
And then this is one of the spots where it's a hard trail braking brake zone. I've locked the wheel up a lot there, so I really focused on it. Obviously, I'm taking that deep breath. And the same thing as we come up here, it's a braking zone, downhill, trailing it into the right. I take this big breath and I start holding it, and then I come in. That guy's a total cheater because he's past me. This is the downhill left portion that as we go in, this is a high speed sweeping left. You're just trying to keep the car on track here. And then as we come up the hill, this corner is kind of a non-event. And trying to trail it in and really carry that momentum. And you can see I'm kind of holding my breath through here with these. And now we're getting a downhill portion. We're hustling down and trying to get to this corner that is to get us set up for the front straight.
I'll pause it now, but we were getting, and I didn't know how to fix it, so I didn't even try it. But the movie, the engine noise was overwhelming your voice. So we got about a minute, but we can go back and some of these areas where you can see where the what Matt was talking about was his heart rate was going up, the breathing was going up, and there's that if we go back just a little bit, there's that corner where his heart rate was going up right after it. That's the trailing indicator, as Matt was talking about. Mm-hmm. And then the breathing and the heart rate going up and down at certain spots. And when you caught that car, when that car passed you, I don't remember which way it was, but I think you right there, he jumped on the inside of you, and the heart rate went up, and the front shock was moving around, obviously, but the heart rate went up and the breathing went up right when he went past you. And even your voice, when you were telling it, they couldn't hear you well, but you even cursed him a little bit as you were watching the video.
Right.
So
I think I really called him a cheater. It's the only way you can get by me.
Anything else you have to say about that, Matt? We're kind of getting ready to button things up. We don't have any questions in the question box, but give us a little bit of a kind of a final information about this video we just watched, and we'll start to wind it up.
The one I saw, one question about it was, what track is this? It's Club Motorsports in Tamworth, New Hampshire, a very local track to me. I wasn't sure the first time I saw the track if I'd like it, and I'd say it's an amazing track. I've driven it from a GTI to a McLaren, and the fun factor changes, but it's always amazingly fun. And very challenging, as you can see in my heart rate, that there's all these challenges and it's going on. So I hope this gave people a glimpse into what you can get out of heart rate and all the other measures in here. And it kind of sets up the equipment, the setup, and basics of what you can get out of it. And then when we get somebody who's a real expert on the medical side, the doctor side, we can then take it to the next step and kind of do round 2 and get deeper into all this.
I think that Andrew has a question in the question and answer talking about KPI lookout pertaining to sensory overload, taxing the driver's mental, bandwidth, and its impact on heart rate. I think that's a great one for the doctor to answer. That one's probably a tough one. You have anything to add to that one?
Yeah, I know Robbie had linked to the quick video I did with Dr. Ferguson on heart rate variance. Yeah. That's really where you want to dig into that a little bit. So if you check out that video, he'll talk about that in depth more, and I'm sure we're going to do it on the next one.
There's the link in the chat box, and it'll be in the description below for those of you watching on YouTube later.
Yeah.
I did do a little research while Matt was talking a little bit. Again, we're going to have on Thursday, we're going to have, and I'll talk about it in a slide, we're going to have a Race Studio 3 beta update number 6, where we're getting closer and closer to it being, as Matt mentioned, a product you might want to be able to use a little bit more than just beta. And so we'll talk about that on Thursday. And on January 5th, Tuesday, after a little bit of a break, we're gonna take January 5th. We're gonna have Ray Phillips come in. It's gonna kind of tie into a little bit of this at some level, but Ray's gonna come in and talk about. You've got your data. It may not be Race Studio 3. You may not have any medical data, but you're going to have some. You had an incident where you slid out, hit the tire wall, or got in an accident with somebody, something like that. Ray's going to come in and talk about how to review that data and understand it. Do an accident reconstruction, for lack of a better word, but in the data, try to understand what went wrong. Why did the accident happen? So we're going to take a look at a deeper dive into accident data, and that'll be kind of an interesting thing. January 12th, Tuesday, January 12th, Dr. Ferguson will be joining us. Homework for all of you guys watching. Put that on your calendar. Be ready to come join us. Some of the questions that you've got, that no doubt that you're thinking of this and going, well, okay, how's that relate? And and then you'll think of some good questions. Jot them down and be ready. And come back when we have Dr. Ferguson. We're not going to talk a lot about hardcore technical data and the hardware, because we've covered a lot of it here. We'll probably link this video in the notes heading out, telling you everybody that Dr. Ferguson is going to be joining us, because this would be a good one to watch before Dr. Ferguson joins us. And then we're going to have some questions. He's going to have some great scientific, medical, topics he's going to cover, and then of course questions. So that'll be kind of fun. That'll be Tuesday, January 12th. So everybody be ready for that one. Matt, while I slide over to the slide, give everybody just a quick idea. It's going to vary huge, but what the cost to get into something? What is the low end to get into something you can kind of get some of this data with? And then what's that high end that for that amateur guy, and then that IndyCar Formula One level? We don't need to talk about that price, but give us some idea why I changed slides.
Yeah. So, at the basic level of heart rate and the measures of everything, we're talking $500-600 into Can 2 if you have that set up as the low end of everything, to $3,500 when you get into the core temperature and the breathing and everything else with the more advanced setups that you can do more. But all those levels, like for a team that maybe is doing endurance events, the power out of this little box is pretty amazing, to be able to log heart rate, HRV, a measure of stress, and then to give you what driver was in the car when all that was going on.
Perfect. And here's some links that we threw into the presentation. I think they've all been Matt's, I think, talked about every one of them. There is have been links in the chat box for those of you here live, and all of these links will be in the description below when this video comes out in about an hour or so. Okay. So let's talk about this is where the video is going to be. Everybody, I think, knows a chunk of this, but 138 videos and growing. You know, we got one more this year that we'll be putting up there. We have been having a great time this year. These have been all very, very informative to me, certainly, and I know to a lot of people that have been getting giving me feedback as well. So go check it out. There are lots of other videos there as well. Take a little time, please subscribe and take a look at it. We've been I think we had 4 people in Texas this weekend for some different racing. So we're still out at the racetracks. Keep looking for us. If you can't catch up with us at your local track, there's an 800 number that is out there for you. Give us a holler. Robbie says barbecue and racing when they were in Texas over the weekend, so that was probably pretty good for them. I did see Matt did see it as well. A lot of barbecue pictures on Facebook and other social media from our friends down there. So the talked about it already a couple of times, so we won't spend any real time, but the next webinar in a couple of days, December 17th, Emiliano here is in the background has been answering questions of some of you that you've typed in. We're gonna come in and it's more or less gonna be all live data. We're gonna just come in. There's been another bundle of bug fixes and enhancements, added functionality. There'll be a release if you're using Race Studio 3 beta with the gold icon. Make sure you go in and update it. There has been 2 or 3 updates since the last one, and there will be one leading into or right when we have this webinar on Thursday. That'll give us even more enhancements and some more things that you've been wanting to make sure you get working before you can actually start using it in any type of production work, like Matt says. So, like Matt said earlier. So join us on Thursday. That'll be a great one. We're looking forward to that. And kind of our closing slide. Matt, again, I thank you. You came in the last minute and put together a presentation that I know it's something you're very passionate about anyway. So it's something you've been doing a lot, but it still takes a lot of work to put it together into a presentation. So appreciate all the work. There's all Matt's contact information. If you have any further questions about this kind of a thing, Matt at trailbrake.net. And Matt has been pushing and working real hard with his Instagram account. So take a look at that. As he's traveling around, I know he put some images out there and some other things. So Matt, anything else you'd like to add as we kind of close this one down?
No, please give me some feedback on this. If this is stuff folks like, we can put more together. I know we're going to get a lot covered with Dr. Ferguson, and I think it's a really neat part that we can work on when we're not at the track. And I hope you guys enjoyed it, and we can do more or do different or whatever people want.
Perfect. And again, this is the lead into what really is the big show that we've wanting to do when it talks about the medical side, and that's with Dr. Ferguson on the 12th of January on that Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. Join us then, but we've got a couple more in between there. Thanks everybody for coming. I appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed it as much as we did, and we'll see you in a couple of days on Thursday. Talk to you soon.